Just talk us through what we know so far about the budget. We know quite a lot, quite frankly. A lot has been leaked, hasn't it?
Yeah, we seem to have lost the grand old tradition of budget secrecy. It used to be that chancellors resigned if they accidentally left the budget on a photocopier or whatever Hugh Dalton used to copy his paperwork back in the 50s and 60s. We know a huge amount about what's going to be in the budget tomorrow. As you said, the minimum wage is going up. That's an increase of about £1,000 a year for the 2.5 million workers on the minimum wage. A lot of that will be offset, though, remember, by those increases in national insurance contributions, the end of the universal credit uplift, the freezing of thresholds. We also know that the 5 or so million public sector workers, their 1 year pandemic pay freeze is going to be removed. They'll have to wait until next year until they know the precise awards that they get, be they nurses, teachers, members of the armed services or whatever, when the Low Pay Commission will, the Public Sector Pay Commission will make its judgment. We know there's going to be money for transport. We know there's going to be lots more money for the NHS, even though the NHS budget's already up 30% since before the pandemic and up 70% over the last year. Yet many studies show that our National Health Service, for all the extent that we deify it, actually performs below average compared to many other comparable countries for all the money that we spend on it. So an awful lot of news is already out there, but we'll have to see what the Chancellor says on Wednesday and what more gets. It's not even leaked because this is an official briefing that the Treasury's doing. It seems very different to previous years.
Yeah, I mean, raising the national living wage is seen as a positive move by government, but for small businesses and others who rely on that sort of employment, it means higher costs.
Certainly does, Simon. The government will say this is them awarding the 2.5 million workers on minimum wage a pay increase, but it isn't, of course. It's their firms, and firms are already facing a huge increase in taxation in the years ahead. We don't hear much about it, but we've already got announced a 19% to 25% increase in corporation tax. Those national insurance contribution increases I mentioned earlier, they also apply to firms as well. A lot of those small and medium-sized firms that you mentioned, which in this country employ the vast majority of our workforce and generate most growth, they also want to see a change in business rates, those taxes on the rateable value of their business. A lot of small businesses say, rightly in my view, that those business rates discourages investment. You pay business rates before you've taken a pound even in turnover, let alone made a profit. But for all the pre-briefing that we have had, the most important number in the budget has not been pre-briefed, and that is the rate of growth, because by spending all this money, Rishi Sunak's betting on much bigger growth. We're meant to be in the middle of this V-shaped recovery, but I'm afraid that's not what the growth figures are currently showing.
And Liam, you know, we're talking about so much money being spent. It sort of seems there wasn't a pandemic at all.
Well, we kind of hoped, Kirsty, that by now the economy would be going gangbusters, but it simply isn't. The latest GDP numbers are flat. You've got some people even predicting we could face a recession next year. I think that's overdoing it, but we're certainly not in an economic boom. So it's very difficult to say that growth will pay for all this extra spending. So he's going to have to borrow more at a time when financial markets are getting more and more sceptical of the UK borrowing more and more money and printing more money in order to fund government spending. The problem we've got is that this economy is kind of handcuffed. It should be booming right now, but it's these supply chain issues, it's these shortages, which are a global phenomenon, not just a UK phenomenon. In the UK in particular, we've got skill shortages, which means prices are going up. We've got a lot of inflation around at the moment. The Bank of England itself is saying inflation is going to be 4% by the end of the year, double its target. And when you get a combination of high inflation and low growth, it's very difficult to say, if you stand up at the dispatch box as Chancellor, that a rising tide is going to lift all boats. These pay rises we're talking about, they could be blown away by inflation. And when you get lots of inflation, firms don't invest. It's hard to get growth going. So the Chancellor's doing very well with his kind of specific headline-grabbing announcements, carefully choreographed ahead of Wednesday. But the number that really counts on Wednesday is what his growth assumptions are going forward and whether the rest of the world thinks that those numbers are credible. And I suspect they may look a little bit toppy.
People get very tired of spin. You know, we've all had years under various governments of spin. And anybody who's looking at the figures and saying, well, yes, you're putting the living wage up, but energy prices are soaring, our bills are going up, filling the car has never been more expensive. Inflation you talk about. There is a real sense for people that actually things are getting worse, they're not getting better.
Well, I wrote a column a couple of months ago, Simon, that the UK could face a winter of discontent, harking back to the late 70s, the period of our youth when we saw politics convulsed by, falling living standards and economic turbulence. And I was accused of being alarmist. I don't think I could be accused of being alarmist now. Look, I've got huge optimism in the sense that I believe in the British economy and I believe in our innovative abilities, our entrepreneurialism. But this is a difficult time, particularly if you are on a low or even an average income. Living standards are being slashed by price rises, and no amount of government spending, however carefully presented, can get rid of that feeling that there isn't a feel-good factor at the moment. After a year, 18 months of pandemic, we thought there would be a feel-good factor. We thought those animal spirits in the economy would be released and we get a huge growth surge. We had signs of that in the first and second quarter of this year. But over the summer, as I said, the economy seems to have got stuck in the mud. The British economy now is not booming, it's barely growing. And against that kind of backdrop, it's very hard, however carefully his spin doctors put this forward and try and tell journalists that things that aren't true are true. It's very difficult for a chancellor to stand up and say he's being credible and responsible when you've got low growth, but you're still determined, whether from number 11 or number 10, to splurge lots of money.
Elaine, we just want to get your thoughts on the housing market. Zoopla, one of the country's biggest real estate companies, said that the housing market's on track to reach its highest levels of sales since 2007. Around 1.5 million sales have been made across the UK this year. We've been talking about that already today. I mean, surely this is good news, is it?
Well, it depends which end of the telescope you look, Kirsty. Yes, there's lots of housing sales going on because there was lots of pent-up demand from the pandemic period when house sales were much lower. During the pandemic, house prices went up quite a lot, but on very low volumes. You're now getting large volumes in the housing market simply because as lockdown eases and hopefully recedes into our history, people are getting on with their lives. And, people have families, they move houses, they have to reorder their affairs, and that's happening. But if you don't own a house, then these extra sales mean that prices are going up. There's a whole generation of people who are priced out, generation rent, if you like. Many of them between 25 and 40 who want to have families, want to move into their own place like their parents did and buy a home, but simply can't because they're priced out. And I'm quite disappointed personally, actually, that the government seems to have abandoned reforms that were aimed at getting the house building market moving in order to provide more homes, so prices leveled off and gradually became more affordable. So, yeah, it's great if you own a property that the property market is buoyant, but not if you're one of the increasing numbers of people who want to own a property but can't. We now have a rate of home ownership in this country which is below the EU. We think we're a nation of homeowners, but on international standards at the moment, we're not.
Well, Liam, you have another cup of coffee at home. You need to get in because you're on at 1, on the money, 1 o'clock. There we go. I knew it. And, of course, you'll be bringing us full budget coverage tomorrow. What's left to know tomorrow, budget day. But we'll see you later. Liam,
Thanks,
thank you.
Nice to see you both.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.